Pant. I work in the technology team at the New York Times, and when I came here, I was pretty impressed to see at first it really felt like, the New York Times tech department on the 8th floor, for those who visited there or worked there, felt a lot like working at places where my friends worked at Google or Facebook, and I was really impressed. And it's the culture here that the CTO had encouraged, since he'd been here, and it was one of the things that attracted me and a number of the folks to come and work here. And so we talk a lot about technology. A lot of people who know the Times know it's also the place where some of the best journalists in the world work, but also some of the best technologists in the world work. In fact, Wired magazine said that in an article that some of the best developers in the world work at the Times. And a lot of really great people come here to visit these events. Most of the times when we do these events, they are really about technologies. Could be high level, could be hardcore technologies. Our last one was about HTML5 that talked about Node.js, CoffeeScript, and HTML5 itself. We've had speakers from Google, various other companies here. But what's exciting about today's talks is that it's about something that's even more important. It's about building a culture where people excel and do great work. And that's the most important thing in a company. A lot of companies focus on process. Some others focus on technologies, tools, and standards. But what's really most important are the people, the people who work here, and the engineers. And every company that really invests in the engineers, the engineering culture, and the people tends to be a lot more successful than companies who put process or technology ahead of people. So today's talks are really about people and the culture, of course, specific to software engineering. We do a lot of that here at the Times. We invest Beta 620. That's one example. Recently launched. This is our beta site, labs, if you will. Projects go up here. I won't do a full demo of the site here, but this is where a lot of our projects go up that engineers have built on their own or in response to our tech innovation challenges that we have in the company. That's another thing that encourages folks to work. It's a combination of somewhat like the Google 20% time concept, plus using some of your work time on projects that may interest you, which are along the guidelines of what we put forth. And then people go and build these things. We've had some very impressive projects come out of this. Some of them have graduated, have become official parts of the site, others not, but it's a great place for engineers to showcase their work. And a number of the engineers at the Times team who work on these and get nominated among the finalists or the winners get cash prizes. So that's one of the things we do. We also have ice cream socials where the top executives of the company, our CTO Mark Franz is in the middle wearing the apron serving, and the very top people of the company do that. In fact, we do these every day. No, I'm just kidding. we had one today, and when some of the folks who had just joined our team, we've been hiring furiously to grow our engineering staff. So when some people joined, we were telling them, no, this is how it is. This is what you come to work every day. But you'll notice it's the top folks serving. Of course, we have healthy food too, and this keeps people going. But coming back to what really interests in building a culture are the results that people bring. And there are examples. A lot of places you'll find there's a lot of process. There are perfect project plans, whether it's agile, whether it's traditional methodology. But the results aren't that amazing. And there are other places where you find a team does amazing work and no one quite understands why. And that's really because the people care passionately about what they do. An example is that this event, the last time we had the HTML5 one, this one, they have been really well planned. And I always thought, being new to the Times, I thought these were planned by professional event planners. And it's actually the engineering team at the New York Times that plans these events, puts in their own personal time. Everyone from the photographers to the people manning the booths to letting people in, doing everything else. It's all done by the engineering team here, and that shows the amazing passion that people have for working here at the Times. We've drawn a lot of interesting, pretty impressive talent here. The inventors of programming languages work here. Authors and maintainers of pretty well-known open source projects work here. And our goal is to build more of that culture and continue on that track. And these talks are certainly part of that. So among the leaders we have here who will be speaking, I'll give you a quick overview of the format. The speakers will come and speak, and as they are winding up and the next speaker is getting set up, I'll ask them a few questions, and then we'll have questions and answers for the entire group at the end of the presentation. For those who don't already know, the restrooms are out that way on that side. So our first speaker today is Jessica Lawrence. She is Managing Director of the NY Tech Meetup. That's the largest tech meetup. She's also a columnist for the Press Enterprise and a frequent speaker at many conferences and events. She has really good insight into building cultures, hiring, retention, because of her experience and participation at the meetups. So I'd like to invite Jessica to.
Bear with me one second, I switch out computers. Hi, everybody. As he said, my name is Jessica Lawrence, and I am the Managing Director of New York Tech Meetup. For those of you who may not know what New York Tech Meetup is, we are the largest meetup in the world. We were founded in 2004 by Scott Heiferman, who founded Meetup.com. And we grew from 2 members in 2004 up to almost 19,000 members today. And we became a nonprofit about a year ago, and I think probably one of the first meetups to actually transition into being an actual organization. And I came on board in April as the Tech Meetup's first full-time paid employee. And we do an event every month at the Skirball Center at NYU that attracts about 850 people in the audience. We have 9 or 10 companies demo their new technology, whether it's a mobile app, a website. We've had companies like Foursquare and Livestream, GroupMe, all do their kind of introduction to the world through our stage. So the meetup has become a pretty popular event. Before meetup, I was kind of in a completely opposite job. So instead of being surrounded by really cool, innovative, fast-paced things and a whole bunch of guys, I was surrounded by a whole bunch of girls in an organization that was pretty slow and old-fashioned and sometimes really got caught up in red tape and being really risk-averse. I was the CEO of a Girl Scout Council in Southern California. So I spent about 7.5 years first doing fundraising for them and then becoming Chief Operating Officer and then CEO. So I came to New York Tech Meetup with basically no background in technology. I hadn't lived in New York before. I just moved here at the end of January. But I had a lot of background in nonprofit management. So my talk tonight is a little combination of kind of both things. What I've learned about tech in the city since I moved here and since I started my work with New York Tech Meetup, and what I know about organizational development and management through the work that I did with Girl Scouts and all of the research that I've done into organizational development. So when I first started my job with New York Tech Meetup, I got a lot of emails, a lot of people coming up to me saying, hi, congratulations. But I also got one question more than any other. And that one question was, do you know any developers? Because people assumed that even if I had just been on the job at New York Tech Meetup for one day, that I must know a whole bunch of developers and could potentially help them solve their developer problem. And the questioning was so intense that I really thought that there were like no developers at all in New York, because people would come to me desperate, like a founder needed a tech co-founder, or someone had just fired their entire dev team and they needed a new one right away. And it was like people wanted me to play matchmaker and match them up. And so I started thinking about this and wondering what was really going on in the New York tech scene, what was happening with New York Tech, how fast it was growing, and whether there really was a problem with the shortage of developers in the city. So I started first by looking at our own membership growth just to get a sense of how fast tech was accelerating. And as I said, we started with 2 members in 2004, and then grew to about 8,000 members in 2008. And now, by 2011, we're at almost 19,000 members. So we've seen this huge growth just in the past couple of years. I also had an initial conversation with Scott Heiferman because Scott does a lot of hiring for Meetup.com, and he has a lot of insight into what's been happening in tech because he's been in tech for a long time. And Scott told me that in the past, he would always ask people a question when he was interviewing. He would ask them why they were moving to New York, because a lot of times he was talking to people who were transplants, who were potentially coming here from Silicon Valley or some other area of the country. And most of the time when he asked that question, the response that he would get was that someone was coming because their husband or wife was moving here, they were coming to be closer to family. But he said that in the last 6 months, that's changed. And for the first time ever, when he asked that question, the response that he's getting is that people are moving here because New York is the place to be if you want to be in tech. We're also seeing a big transition in terms of how much venture capital funding is coming into the city. For the first time ever, New York has surpassed Boston in terms of how much venture capital money we're seeing coming to support tech. And obviously, we've had some big acquisitions, some big funding rounds, GroupMe getting acquired by Skype, and just announced today, General Assembly getting a big round of money to support their work. So it's really, really clear that tech in the city is huge. But it still doesn't answer the question, are we really having a problem with a shortage of developers? And what I started looking at was, well, what types of stuff are people building? So if you look on nytm.org/present, that's our page for accepting applications for demos at New York Tech Meetup. And it's an interesting spreadsheet to look at because basically I get to see the entire tracking list over the last couple of years of what types of companies are applying to demo at the meetup. And when I look at that list, I see a number of trends. The first trend is that in the last few months, we've seen a lot of people focusing on local, not just location-based, but really hyper-local applications that tie together the concepts of sharing and the mesh and put them into startups. So we've got things like TaskRabbit and Zarly that really capitalize on helping you find somebody in your very local neighborhood that can help you get a task done if you don't have time to do it yourself. We've got things like Sportaneous, which helps you find pickup games in your neighborhood if you're looking for somebody to play basketball or a game of soccer with. We've got things like Snapgoods that really concentrate on that concept of the mesh. If you need a power tool and you don't want to go to Home Depot and spend $350 on one, you can find somebody in your neighborhood who's willing to let you borrow one. We've got people sharing skills, and even the last one down here, Spark Relief, is one that was created to help people in the middle of a disaster when they don't know where they can stay. And other people in their neighborhoods, in cities outside of their towns, can post places that are available for people who may have lost their homes in a fire or an earthquake to stay. So that's trend number one. Trend number two, we're seeing a lot more connection to social graph. So things like Sonar really helping you take Foursquare to the next level by when you check in, seeing who's there that you may be connected with on Facebook, on Twitter, how many people you might be connected with. This is really taking off on the concept that something like Yelp is great because you get to see recommendations from people about restaurants in the neighborhood, but a lot of times you don't know who those people are who are recommending things to you. And so this concept of adding social graph to a lot of these different startups really helps you focus in on, you know that your friend Joe is really good at picking restaurants. So you want to know what Joe recommends in this neighborhood, not just what anybody recommends in this neighborhood. So even dating sites like Click are doing that with dating. They're helping you find people to date that are within 2 circles of your Facebook friends. So, and Best Vendor is a new site that's helping companies. If you're a startup and you're looking for a bank or an insurance company and you have no idea where to go, you can use Best Vendor to find other companies and see what they're using so that you're not searching for these things blindly. We're also seeing a lot of companies that are really working to simplify processes that used to be really, really difficult for the layperson to do, something that you always needed to hire a developer to create for you. So OnePager just launched last night, or a couple weeks ago, and demoed last night at New York Tech Meetup. And they're basically a very, very simple way for a small business to develop a website and manage a website completely on their own. And they actually did one within the span of their 5-minute demo to basically demonstrate how fast someone could throw a website together. Things like AppsBar and Framey, allowing people to create apps and embed video on their sites in a very, very simple and fast way. We're also seeing a lot of what I call we're the blank of the blank. And so we're the blank of blank is that sort of somebody saying we're the Airbnb of ride sharing. And we get, these are actual quotes from, on our applications we ask, what makes your tech cool? And these are some of the exact phrases for people explaining to us what makes their website cool. And so everybody's taking these existing business models and applying them to different products or services. And it's actually really interesting because we're starting to see people refer to other companies that have barely even launched yet. So I had somebody say we're the Zarly of something or other, and like nobody barely even knows what Zarly is yet, but people are trying to use that to describe what it is that their company does. And we're also seeing something that I call the Groupon effect. And the Groupon effect isn't necessarily just about the, the proliferation of daily deal sites. That happened a while ago. But what we're seeing now is people developing companies to solve your problem of daily deal sites. So we had someone launch a company with us called City Pockets that basically allows you to aggregate all of your daily deals in one place so that you can use them before they expire. And then also allows you to sell your daily deal on a secondary market in case you're not going to get to use it by the time it expires. So people are taking these startups that have gotten huge and trying to find solutions to the problems that these startups have actually created. So all of this shows us that we're getting to the point where there's a lot of tech being developed in New York. But again, we go back to that question of, do we actually have a developer shortage? And so I looked at some real data about what's going on with who's graduating with computer science degrees, what's happening in our education system, and why are all these people coming after me all the time and asking me to find them developers? So the first fact that I found is that there's not a single state in this country as of 2010 that requires students to take a computer science course before they graduate from high school. So we're not getting a lot of exposure at young ages for kids in computer science. We also saw a decline in the number of computer science degrees awarded over the last 6 or 7 years. So between 2004 and 2008, the numbers went from about 60,000 undergraduate degrees down to about 38,000. And that's starting to go back up a little bit, but that was obviously a big dip. We also are seeing that a lot of the traditional computer science degree programs kind of take too long. By the time someone's gotten through a 4-year program, a lot of times technology has changed substantially. I've had people that actually teach computer science courses as part of degree programs tell me that they can't keep up with the curriculum changes fast enough to really keep pace with what's actually happening out in the real world. And then we're also seeing a lot of engineering majors who, the percentage of engineering majors in undergraduate programs that are foreign nationals is huge, and they oftentimes can't stay in the country after they graduate because of visa issues. And then if you look at one of the sites that we operate, we started a program called Made in New York, which celebrates companies that are actually built and coded here in the city. And one of the rules is you have to be 50% or more coded front end and back end here in New York to be included on this list. And if you look at the list on our website, almost every single company on the list is hiring. And that says a lot about how many people are looking for engineers. If you look at what types of people they're looking to hire, they're almost all engineers. So I've seen some people argue that we don't have an engineering problem, that really it's not that big of a deal. But from what I see, there is something of an engineering challenge. And I think part of that is that you take this pool of engineers and you start by taking out the engineers that work in finance and consulting. And then you take out the engineers who are already working at startups or other companies that they like. And then you take out the engineers that don't have the skill sets that you're looking for, and you're left with a very small pool of engineers. And most of the people who are talking to me and asking me for engineers are people who work at startups. And so that offers, I think, a different hurdle a lot of times than people who are working for large companies. Goldman Sachs and Google have a leg up. They have huge recruitment budgets. I've talked to kids from Dartmouth and Tufts and Harvard who say that they don't really think about working for startups because nobody from a startup ever comes to their campus. That the people who they see, especially at a place like Dartmouth, which is kind of remote, are the people from Google, the people from Goldman, and so that's where they end up working. And so what happens, I think, a lot of times, in particular what I'm seeing with startups and what I've heard with a lot of the startups that have problems, at least at first, getting a really good development team in place, is that they get to this point and they get desperate. And just like when you're dating and you get really desperate, you end up making really bad choices. So you end up in this situation hiring people that are not really a good fit for your company, but you're under a lot of pressure to at least get some kind of development team in place. And you want to have your company to the point where you can get started. But I've had a lot of friends tell me that they've done this, and then, you know, $25,000 later, $100,000 later, a couple $100,000 later, they realize they hired the wrong people, and they don't actually have a product, or they at least don't have a product that they can use. So I think the initial thing for a lot of us, you know, I came into this not being a developer, not really understanding necessarily what it was like to be a developer working in a company. And in talking to a lot of the developers that I've met through this entire process, the first thing that I've learned is that it's important for startups and for any company to realize that hiring a developer is not like buying office equipment. And it's not like that for a number of reasons. Number one, it's not like that because you don't want to hire a developer just based on their list of attributes, i.e. their resume. So like a copy machine, you know, comes with a list of all of the great bells and whistles that it has and features that it has available. For a developer, yes, they may be good at Rails, or they have all of these sets of skills that they can apply, but that's not the only thing that they bring to the table. And I think there are a lot of non-technical founders out there who see a developer as someone who's a tool, an asset, kind of like a piece of office equipment, instead of an integral part of a team. And the other reason why it can't be thought of as office equipment is because hiring someone onto your team, no matter what position they're in, is a key aspect of making your company culture and making your organization something that will be successful going forward. You know, I had the realization not that long ago that basically every large company in the world, even the ones that a lot of the people that are now in startups quit in order to get away from, at one point were startups themselves. So, you know, what happened along the way that these startups that people think are amazing and cool and fun, and a lot of times are, turned into these awful organizations that people no longer want to work for. And so something happened along that path, and a lot of that has to do with the hiring process. With the hiring process. So one of the things that I learned through my work with Girl Scouts is that the questions that you ask during the interview process are some of the key things that really make the difference between hiring a really good team and not having a good team. When I first started working at Girl Scouts and we were interviewing, we would ask pretty basic interview questions. But I had this key realization at one point that the questions that we were asking were really just basically asking someone to regurgitate their resume to us. And I wasn't getting at who the people were that we were actually hiring. So I'd hire somebody and realize that they seemed great in the interview, but by the time we actually got them on board in the office, they just didn't fit. And I couldn't explain it at first, but I just realized there was something completely wrong with our process. So the first thing that we did was try to figure out who we were as an organization, which I think, you know, there are a lot of companies out there that have done that really well. Zappos is talked about a lot as a company that figured out who it was as an organization and now integrates that into their entire hiring process. But that doesn't mean that every company has to be like Zappos. And I think this whole question of who you are sometimes gets a bad rap because people imagine like The Office and, you know, Michael Scott coming up with like 5 core values and putting them up in the break room and saying, this is who we are, this is like our core values as a company. And that's the cheesy way to do core values. And unfortunately, that kind of undermines the whole concept of having a core sense of who you are as an organization and the types of people that you want to hire. So we came up with core values, things that were important to us, and I think that's a key step in figuring out what questions to ask the people that you're interviewing. Because one of our core values, for instance, was hiring people who are curious. Because I really believe that you need to hire people who are curious if you're going to have people in your organization who are innovative, continually want to learn, and are constantly looking for what they can do to make things better. But asking standard interview questions really didn't get to the heart of whether someone is curious or not. So we started asking questions about what types of books they were reading, what projects they were working on outside of work, what things they liked to do when they were a kid. And a lot of that gave us 1,000 times more insight into whether they were a curious person and whether I was going to get someone on my team who actually fit with what I was looking for in terms of building that culture that was more innovative and more willing to take risks. So we also changed our interview process, which we used to do, bring in one candidate, have them sit in front of a few of us who were on staff and interview them. And we went through a huge organizational restructure, and I basically started having to hire a lot of people at once. So I started doing panel interviews and would bring in 5 candidates at a time to sit in front of 2 of us who were interviewing them. And we didn't tell them we were going to do this ahead of time, but we brought the 5 of them in, sat them in front of us, and said, all right, here's how this works. We're asking the group a question. Whoever wants to answer first, go first. And you'll all answer the question. And so they had to answer the question in front of each other. And what it taught me was that I learned more out of observing the human dynamic of how people handled that situation than potentially what I learned from their answers to the questions. Because I would see who always answered first, who always answered last and copied everybody else's questions or answers, who looked at somebody else when a person was answering really badly and smirked at them. I caught somebody smirking at someone else's answer one time, and I was just like, all right, note to self, that person is never going to work in this organization, because if they can't get through an interview being kind to the people that are with them, then they're not going to be a good fit for our organization. And changing those little things, tweaking that little process, made it so that we started hiring people that really fit with what we were looking for. And interestingly enough, it didn't mean that we ended up with a group of people who were all the same. We actually had a way more diverse group of people than we had ever had in the past in terms of race and gender and background, everything. But I think a lot of those core things that we were looking for, people that were curious, people that knew how to have fun, people that would work really hard, those core values stayed the same throughout. Another thing that I've learned, and I learned this working at Girl Scouts, but I also found this in talking to people about what engineers look for. And so when I've asked, what is it that will keep an engineer in a job at a company, what I've heard in response is challenging and interesting work and interesting people. And that the work needs to be something that keeps your mind going and doesn't get boring. And the interesting people part is not just about having people that you can have fun with, that's extremely important, but it's also about being surrounded by people who can teach you something and who you can learn something from. And the autonomy and trust. That to me was a huge part of my learnings from Girl Scouts, because Girl Scouts is an organization that's very built on hierarchy. It's almost 100 years old. And so when I came into the organization, there was almost no trust and no autonomy. When I was a junior fund development associate, I had to ask what kind of chicken I was allowed to serve at the fundraising lunches that we had before I could put in the order with the caterer. So I realized pretty quickly that that made me not feel very engaged with the organization. But when I started changing things and started adding a lot more autonomy and a lot more trust to the organization and really giving our team a lot of flexibility in terms of making their own decisions, things changed. People got more engaged, people got more innovative, they were a lot more willing to take risks. And the interesting thing is that this has applied across the board. Everyone that I've talked to, no matter what industry they're in, no matter whether I'm talking about developers or product managers, everybody wants this. And so for me, these are 3 of the key things that I've found in terms of making an organization work in the long term. And then the last little piece of advice that I've learned is, I've looked a lot at what happens to a company. Like, why does that startup that was so awesome in the beginning sometimes turn into that company that ended up so awful in the end? And what can large companies do to try to prevent that from happening? And it's something that I call the dumbass effect. So the dumbass effect is, there's a guy who goes into the break room and he decides to microwave his bowl of macaroni and cheese and forgets to take the metal fork out and sets the microwave on fire, which sets the kitchen on fire. And so all of a sudden, the way that the company reacts is they don't say, God, that guy's a dumbass, we should probably fire him. They say, no more microwaves, or no more kitchen, or you can't have food here anymore. And companies do that all the time, always overreacting to people doing dumbass things. And when you're old, like Girl Scouts was, you start adding those things up over the years, and all of a sudden there are all of these rules in place that no one can remember why they were there in the first place. And it's all because of someone that did something that was a dumbass thing to do, and all of a sudden this company has lost its autonomy. It now is risk averse, it's scared of everything because it's trying to prevent this one thing from happening instead of just taking care of the dumbass. So hopefully that's helpful. I think Ken and Naveen are going to go deeper into what they've done in their organizations to actually really develop strong developer culture. And then I guess we'll take some more questions when we do our panel discussion. I think companies suck when they take autonomy away from people, when you're really forced into a very strict structure and strict rules that make no sense. I think people do best when they're given some structure and some goals, but when they're given a lot of flexibility within that structure, and there's tons of research behind that to support that thinking.
All right, so we'll ask some more
Awesome.
questions as we go along. And so our next speaker is Ken Little, who's the Director of Engineering at Etsy. Ken actually is a graduate of the New York Times technology team, very well respected person here in the team. So Ken grew the engineering team there, was part of it as it grew from 15 to over 90 engineers. Has a lot of experience building a culture of innovation and great development, both here at the Times and at Etsy. So without further ado, I'll give it over to Ken.
Hi. Hi, sorry, give me 1 second. All right, it's always the fun part. Hi, I'm like Reggie said, I'm Ken Little. I'm one of the directors of software engineering at Etsy. I joined Etsy in March of last year when the dev staff was about 15 developers. Right now it's a little over 80. So I was part of a pretty fun and explosive growth in the software organization. And when I joined Etsy, the company was sort of at the tail end of their experience with the typical development workflow that doesn't really work for fast-moving web companies, which is some derivative of waterfall with a tremendous amount of process and segmentation of workflow. And so as we were growing the staff, we knew we wanted to really pick up development momentum and build new processes that would actually let us improve the site much more quickly than had been possible in the past. And I just wanted to share a bit about where that actually landed and where Etsy is now, because it's a wholly separate place. Okay, so what is Etsy? For those of you who don't know, it's a marketplace for handmade goods. It's sort of a novel e-commerce site in the sense that it places a lot of emphasis on uniqueness and on authorship. Whenever you buy something on Etsy, there's a very personal element to the exchange. You usually end up talking to whoever it is who made the item that you're buying, and it's the whole point is that you're trying to buy things you can actually connect with. So it's somewhat novel in that regard. At this point, it's pretty successful. We get about 1 billion page views a month. We have about 9 million registered users, and last year our sellers saw $300 million in gross sales. So it's definitely doing pretty well. And there are about 80 engineers at this point, sort of putting all that together. But even with that success, Etsy's a place that that's still very optimistic about the future, and believes that there's a lot that we can still do to better service our community and to grow our community. So it's still an organization that's very biased toward change. We're still very interested in seeing how rapidly we can continue to evolve the product, to make things better for our users. And when I say heavy bias toward change, I mean heavy. We at this point, as we'll see, we'll go through and actually deploy our entire code base up to 30 times a day, making small iterative changes on the site, trying to sort of continuously evolve our product and make it better. So this creates a challenge, right? So the management challenge for us was to build an environment that actually encouraged experimentation and maintained a rapid pace of development. The things that you have to sort of ask yourself when you're trying to take this approach to development is what parts of your process are actually slowing people down unnecessarily? What parts can you cut? Are people spending more time worrying about how to launch the new product that they're working on rather than thinking about whether or not they should launch it in the first place or how to build it? And you want to find those places in how people, in the process that people are taking, and you want to eliminate them and really get people focused on actually making the product better rather than how to get the thing out and how to sort of run the mechanics of changing a website. And so to me, what that means is, as a rule of thumb for engineering management, if you're not coding, you better be a catalyst to coding. You better be finding ways to make your coders stronger, better, and faster. Because that's the whole point. You're trying to really evolve at a very fast pace of change. So, what are the fundamentals of what we've actually done? On the whole, we make small, measurable changes, and we make them very, very frequently. We try to build as many paths to production as we can for people, so that whatever idea it is that they have in their head, there should be very little reason why it doesn't have a path to production, at least to find out if it can actually affect a metric that you're interested in keeping track of. And no barriers. Anybody in the building who can do work and is interested in doing work should be able to do that work. There should be no artificial barriers to whether or not people can achieve what it is that they think is important for the organization. So, small changes. What's a small change? As you think about small changes and what it means to sort of continuously make changes to a software system, it's important to keep in mind that all revision control products up to this point have been built by people who were essentially trying to deploy installed software, which meant once the software was out the door and in the hands of the users, it's actually very hard to get it back and to change it. So the goal in that kind of system is to bundle up your changes, be very certain that they're the changes that you want to make, that they work exactly how you want them to work, and then to ship on a schedule that's convenient for your user base. The web is not installed software. It's essentially continuously deployed. It's every time a user visits your site, they're essentially getting a new copy of whatever your software is that you're running. So you just don't have to take a bundled approach to change management. You can actually have a continuous change process in place that works and makes sense and is stable and is actually better for your users than a bundled change process. So we commit daily to trunk. We don't work in branches. And we don't hang out on QA or stage for long periods of time testing things out. So we push it live, right? Kinda, right? So we hedge a little here. So whenever I say we don't branch, we don't actually use revision control branches that deviate from trunk. We actually do all of our branching in code. And what that means is pretty simple, if else, right? So if you got a new feature you're developing, we have a pretty simple is enabled framework that you can check for your new feature, in this case, awesome new search. You do that check in your code, and if it's true, then you do your new search, and if it's not true, you don't do your new search. It's pretty simple. And whenever you're setting up your configuration, again, you keep it real simple. It's just PHP arrays. I mean, we're PHP based, but this is, I mean, obviously extensible to whatever. And what you realize once you do that, once you have the ability in code, in production, to say who it is who gets to see which feature, or whether or not a given feature is on or off, you can actually extend that to subsets of your user base. And one particularly interesting subset of your user base is yourself, right? So it was not too long after we started using config flags at Etsy to turn features on and off, we extended it so that we could actually turn it on for ourselves, so that we could actually see new features in production before they were live. This has a tremendous number of benefits. Number one is you get to have multiple contributors who are working on a given feature without deviating from trunk. And if you've ever had a long-lived feature branch that's gone on for months and tried to merge it back into trunk, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you will spend a lot of time not focusing on your product, but focusing on your merge procedure and whether or not you've actually regressed anything. And it's not really necessary. If you're constantly committing to trunk, you're committing to trunk literally every day, every other day, you can spread that pain out and make sure that you never sort of take it as a big blunt hit. The other benefit is that the projects that you're working on are just tremendously transparent. There's no hiding when your code is in production. Everyone in the organization can read your code, is committed, it's not hiding on your VM. The people who are interested in your product can see how far along you are, as long as you've turned on the feature for them. It's really beneficial just for communication, right? You don't spend a lot of time trying to tell people, you're 85% done, or this is missing, or you don't have design assets. You can turn it on, you can see exactly where you are. And then the last benefit, of course, is that you're deploying as you're developing. So if you have an 8-week project, at the end of that 8 weeks, your code's already deployed. Congratulations, right? So what that means is turning it on in production is actually pretty boring. You essentially have to toggle a config flag to say, okay, I'm ready for you to go on. At Etsy, we have a number of tools around to make this as easy as possible. One of them is deployment manager just for config flags. This is a system where you can come in and actually change the value of a given config and deploy it out to the site in a matter of minutes. And even in a world where we're deploying 30 times a day, which is 3 or 4 times an hour, you can pretty much jump in and do a config push in between all those deploys at a whim. Okay, so whenever you're doing continuous integration, typically whenever you have a bundled change management system, at the end of it, you'll end up having architecture reviews, you'll end up having code reviews, you'll end up doing a whole bunch of quality assurance steps, especially for the development process. Whenever you're sort of taking this continuous change approach, you're going to do all of that along the way. And it actually turns out to be much more effective. So for code reviews, for instance, at Etsy we do code reviews pretty much with each commit, and this is sort of a no decision point action, right? Don't think about it. Don't question if your change is too small. Just do a code review. If your change is that small, it's really not going to take any of your peers' time to take care of it. This is a code review that I did not too long ago, changing some text on our jobs page, and you guys effectively just code reviewed it for me. Not that hard. The one thing you do have to worry about, though, in this world, since you are sort of constantly asking your peers for code reviews, is you have to watch out for the other side of this. You have to make sure that you don't end up with code reviews that are huge, right? Whenever we do this, it's within our team. You just want to make sure that if one of our developers actually comes in with a 2,000 line change and asks for a peer code review, that doesn't go over too well. That person's asked for a tremendous amount of investment from his peers, and happily it's sort of a self-regulating system. There's a lot of motivation to not do that, whenever you're actually seeking meaningful feedback from your peers, and they're going to have code reviews for you too, and you want to make sure that that you're getting the same thing from them. Unit tests. We have a lot of automated tests. They run on deploy. We've spent a lot of time trying to make sure that they are very, very quick, because the minimal time to deploy is actually capped by however long your unit tests take. I think whenever I started at Etsy, our unit tests were taking 15, 20 minutes. At this point, I think they're down to 5 or so. And we still have, we didn't achieve that by cutting the number of tests or cutting the interestingness of the tests. We worked really hard to actually make our unit tests fast, and to make sure they weren't going to actually build up in a crew and slow down the deploy. And you also, we also run them independent of deploys. But as you're coding throughout the day before you ever even try to get into the situation where you're pushing, we try to make sure developers have run the unit tests. And lastly, excuse me, you're constantly changing the system. So what that means is you better be constantly monitoring your system, and you better have a lot of insight into what's going on in that system, so you can actually course correct rather quickly if you do cause an error. Now the happy news about that is you're making small changes. So if, for instance, you come and you deploy, so this is some of our error graphs that we have that we monitor. And you come along, you do deploy, and these graphs, all the vertical lines are actually deploys. And you see a graph spike, you've got a pretty good idea what change made that spike. So you can come behind it, make a very quick change, and rectify pretty quickly. So we graph a tremendous number of statistics at Etsy. It's constantly growing. We graph error rates. We graph business metrics. So how many people register. If you push a change and all of a sudden logins drop, you've got a serious problem. It's something you definitely want to know. And we take it pretty far. We graph how much coffee is actually in the coffee pot still. So we mean it. Graph everything. And just having these metrics isn't enough. You have to be able to act on them, and act on them quickly. For the better part of this year, the mean time for detection for a problem on our site is under 5 minutes. Once we know about a problem, the mean time to correction is, again, about 5 minutes. So what that means is if we introduce a problem on the site, it's on the site for about 10 minutes on average, right? Which isn't that bad. Okay, so all roads lead to prod. So whenever you have people, we're trying to foster a culture of innovation, a culture of experimentation. We've strived very hard to make it easy to get those ideas onto production in some meaningful way, to make sure that that code is seen in the context of production, where it's actually most easily understood. And we've already seen one way to do this, which is sort of with the configuration flags. And this paradigm actually extends pretty far. So rather than just being on/off, rather than only, we have the ability to turn it on for particular people. So a development group can see something at a very early stage of development. This is actually one of the most useful things for development that we've actually done in a long time. This lets people get a half-baked feature out and actually share it with the team that they're working with, and actually see it in production very, very early on without scaring the life out of the rest of the company with whatever it is that they're working on. And you can also ramp it up to users by percentage. Right? And that 1%. So in this example here, we got 1% of users that your change is going out to, and that 1% is actually very important. So one of the things that we actually have at Etsy is the promise that if you have an idea for a product, there's a pretty low bar from a business perspective to getting that product into production for 1% of users, as long as you can actually build it. And what that means is that you get to actually test out your idea, that you have a product or a change that can actually move a metric against real users, and see if that's actually holding up. Now, the thing is, this is 1% of users, and it's fairly random. So Some changes are beneficial. That's beneficial for a test. But in other cases, you really want the people that you're trying to test to be aware that you're actually trying to test a new feature. And for that, we developed the notion of an experiment. So on Etsy, you can actually go to /experiments, and you can sign up voluntarily for a handful of new experiences on Etsy. Some of them are standalone, like the color browser that we have. This was actually sort of the color browser 2.0, and that's how it ended up an experiment. There was an older one. We wanted people to opt into the new one to try it out for a little while. And also, something like a mobile experience where we're going to default you to the mobile pages on your phone or whatnot when you come, as we start to build that out. And a lot of really great features have actually started to make it out this way. Changes to the way that we manage shops or whatnot have been experiments where we've actually sort of gone out and recruited a number of sellers to opt into the experiment and try it out and see how it goes. And in this mechanism for experiments, it actually you inherit a few features of another product that we have at Etsy called Teams, where you actually have discussions and you can get feedback and whatnot pretty easily from users as they're trying the experiment. And if all of that is still too structured for you, Etsy has hack weeks, sort of periods of time set aside where developers can actually just hack out an idea and see what they can actually get done in 3 or 4 days. We've actually seen a lot of success with this. We had our first hack week last a couple months ago, and from that a few features made it out to production in short order. One of my favorite ones is so Etsy has this notion of favoriting an item. It used to be called hearting, so most of the icons around it are little hearts. And one of the features that came out of Hack Week was the ability to heart an item from the thumbnail rather than just the listings page. So you can favorite an item in a search result or any other place where you end up seeing these little icons in a set. And it really moved the metric. It really increased the number of items that people were favoriting, which for an e-commerce site is a great thing to see. So it was a pretty good success story for a 3-day hack that came out of Hack Week and wasn't on a product roadmap and wasn't really in any product discussion until it was sort of prototyped out and put on the site in context. So the whole point here is, as a management staff, you're trying to make it harder to just sit around and talk about an idea than it is to actually prototype it and put it on the site and say, here, this is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of thing that we're trying to do. So no barriers. If you can do the work, then you can do the work. What does that mean? So one of my favorite aspects of working at Etsy is that there are the lines between departments and responsibilities of departments is actually still very blurred. And I think this is sort of an attribute of smaller companies where people have to wear many hats that we've managed to hold on to for a bit of a longer and extended period of time. So if you know Etsy, if you've heard people talk about, if you've heard other people talk about Etsy at tech conferences or whatnot, you probably know about DevOps, which is the line that's sort of blurred between development and operations, where developers are pretty engaged in the operations process and vice versa. But it's not the only line that's really blurred at Etsy. We also have a pretty blurred line between design and product management and between product management and development. And personally, I find those very exciting lines to be blurred. So one example, so this is Mike the CAC. So he's a product guy. He works on our email products, and he's perfectly capable of developing front-end templates for emails. It's HTML, Smarty, pretty straightforward stuff, and he's been doing most of that kind of work for a long time, perfectly capable of doing it. So he does. This is Mike's commit stream in Git. He's constantly working on the templates with our developers. He goes through code review process like everybody else, because that's how we do it. And this is Mike's deploy showing up in my email box. Right? He's a product manager, but he has the ability to go through, make changes to the product, go through our code review process, and get it pushed out. It's a pretty blurred line between product management and development. And it goes the other way. This is Sam Haskins. He's an intern that's been with us for a couple years now. Came back for a second summer this year. And Sam's a pretty motivated guy. Aside from all of the normal work that we assigned him this year, he had a particular feature that he wanted to see done on our conversations tool, which is essentially sort of an in-house messaging tool that we have at Etsy, like Facebook messaging or whatnot. And Sam had something that he wanted to work out. He did it. Took him a lot of effort and some help from some other developers in our group. And at the end of the day, after everything was said and done, this is Sam on our announcements forum talking about the product he just built, the feature he just built. So it's to me, this is one of the most exciting things that we do at Etsy. We let the people who can do what they're doing do it, and we keep the lines sort of blurred in between, you know, what it is that you're sort of allowed, quote unquote, allowed to do based on what your role is. Okay, so just to summarize real quick, small constant changes, measure everything, watch everything, make sure it's going well all the time. Prod is the greatest context to Devin, so get your work out there as quickly as you can. Lock it down to whoever you need to lock it down to, but there's nothing like seeing whatever you're working on against live data and against a real and changing system. And help the folks that can do more. And at Etsy we say this is just ship. That's it.
While Naveen comes and gets set up here, ask you some things. So, Naveen, invite you to. So one thing I wanted to ask you is a lot of folks, when they move from an engineering role into a management role, is one question they ask is, you know, how will I stay relevant? Because my team respects me if I have all the technical chops and skills, but if I become a manager, and I will no longer have the respect of my team. So how do you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely something that I felt moving from development to engineering to management. The challenge is that all of a sudden your rewards, your value system is derivative, right? It's based off of the success of your team rather than your own personal success. And I think, I mean, you just have to make the cognitive leap that, you know, your contribution to the organization might not be tangible, but it might not be as tangible, but it's still very important. It takes a lot to keep a group of developers moving quickly and in concert. And once you learn to value that, once you learn to understand that that actually means something, that it's actually improving your organization, then at least to me, it becomes meaningful to make that leap.
And what would you recommend for people who are, you know, for companies that have technical and management tracks? What's your view on that?
About how to manage, how to sort of keep people on both tracks, or
yeah, or have different options for people. Do you think that's a good idea to have?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think having options is great. I mean, the thing is, as I think was evidenced in the last talk, there are a lot of options for engineers, and on the whole, they'll follow. There's room in the marketplace for people to follow whatever it is they're wanting to do and that they're capable of doing. And so, in my mind, you want to sort of try to suss out what it is a given engineer is interested in, and try to make room for that in the organization. So there's definitely room for multiple tracks.
Thank you.